The howl in the void. The first warning came as a sound that was not a sound at all. In the deep, reinforced decks of the strike cruiser Vargbjorn, beyond the hearing of mortal crew, a note shivered through the ship's bones. It trembled along adamantium spars and riveted plates, a long, low vibration that had nothing to do with engine harmonics or weapon recoil. The ship felt it. Its machine spirit stirred in its housings, data shrouds tightening in wariness. So did Hakon Greymane. He was on the firing range when it happened, standing in a haze of gun smoke, his storm bolter resting warm and empty in his hands. Targets downrange were perforated sheets of plasteel and ceramite, shredded into confetti. The air stank of propellant and ozone. He blinked once as something faint and cold brushed across his senses, too thin to be a full psychic surge, too subtle to be the usual warp turbulence that dogged any void voyage. It felt instead like a distant howl, carried along the hull, so low it could have been his imagination. But he had lived too long and seen too much to trust that thought. He locked his weapon into the rack and turned toward the exit. "Done already," Bjarki called from 2 lanes over, swapping a spent drum for a fresh one with practiced flicks. "I was about to start wagering on who could strip their target frames first." "Later," Hakon said. "The ship is uneasy," Bjarki snorted. "The ship is always uneasy. It's in love with the machine god and jealous of the warp." Hakon paused at the door, head tilting slightly, listening. The vibration was gone. All that remained was the steady, trustworthy thrum of plasma cores and the distant clatter of servitors attending their tasks. "Still," Hakon said, "check your gear, there will be work soon." Bjarki grinned. "There is always work, brother. That's why we're never bored." Hakon left him to his amusement and strode into the corridor. He found Skorvald Ironseer in the small chapel annex halfway up the ship's spine. The wolf priest was seated at a workbench littered with bones, finger bones from fallen Astartes, a cracked human femur, a sliver of Xenos cartilage captured on some forgotten battlefield. He was engraving names into them with a fine, whining tool, each rune neat and deliberate. "You felt it too," Skorvald said without looking up. "Yes," Hakon replied. "Not a surge, not a breach. Something else." "An echo," Skorvald said. "The tech priests are hissing about disharmonic distortion in the Auspex masts. The rune priests are muttering about turbulence in the shallows. I call it a bad sign." Hakon let his gaze travel across the chapel. The statues were the same. The Emperor, Leman Russ, nameless heroes. The candles burned with a steady light, but something in the air felt taut, like a drawn bow. "Are we in the warp?" Hakon asked. "For days," Skorvald said. "We translated after the last engagement at Dorsis Reach. Jarl Ulfric wants us on station ahead of the main crusade force to harry the edges of the enemy's holdings." Hakon grunted. He remembered Dorsis Reach, a chain of listening stations that had died one by one under a pressure the fleet had barely arrived in time to break. He stepped closer to the far wall. There, among the plinths, stood the statue of Ragnar Halfword. The stone warrior's face was as grim and distant as ever, his name still worn by decades of gauntleted fingers. Hakon's hand drifted to the plinth, then stopped. "You haven't visited him in some time," Skorvald observed. "No," Hakon said. "I have been busy keeping my own promises." Skorvald set down the tool and finally looked up, grey eyes sharp. "Have you?" the wolf priest said. "Or have your promises been keeping you?" Hakon said nothing. He had not returned to Kharon's gate. The war there had burned itself down into the usual imperial pattern, a long, grinding occupation. Purges, rebuilding, tithe recalculation. Vargbjorn's course had carried them onto other systems, other fires. The memory of the breach at Hive Galatea had lodged under his breastbone like a splinter, but it had not been pulled. Not yet. The howl felt familiar, Hakon said at last. Skorvald raised an eyebrow. "From where?" he asked. "We have seen many things, you and I." "From a wall," Hakon said. "From a day when we promised it would not fall." Skorvald studied him for a long moment. "You may be right," he said quietly. "Go to the Strategium. The Jarl will have answers, or he will demand you help him find them." The Strategium was a low murmur of activity when Hakon arrived. Servitors clicked at cogitator stations. Hooded figures of the Mechanicus whispered Bin Harik to restless machine spirits. A hololithic display of the local void space occupied the central dais, a web of vector lines, luminescent motes marking ship positions, and a long, jagged region mapped in angry red. The Silent Vein, read the Gothic script hovering over it. Jarl Ulfric Ironpelt stood with fists on the edge of the projection, his eyes narrowed. Beside him hovered a smaller hololith, a grainy Vox signal waveform looping on repeat. It was that waveform that made Hakon's heart stutter, not for what it was, for the pattern hidden inside. Greymane, Ulfric said, noticing his approach. Good. You can tell me if you hear it too. Hakon came closer, gaze fixed on the looping spike pattern. To a mortal ear, it would be nothing more than a scratchy, repeating static burst, noise shaped by a broken transmitter. To him, it was a voice encoded in mathematics. 2 short bursts, 1 long. A pause, 3 stuttering blips, then a longer, descending hum. I know this, Hakon said slowly. It is a code. Ulfric said. Old PDF encryption from a dead world. Kharon's gate. Hakon's jaw tightened. Where did it come from? He asked. Ulfric gestured to the larger hololith. Merchant convoy, the Jarl said. Pilgrim ships. Refueling barges. 1 escort frigate. They translated into this system 3 days ago on a course to rejoin the Crusade fleet. Something in the vein hit them. We caught the edges of the fight on long-range auspex. By the time we altered course, the convoy was gone. Gone? Hakon echoed. Scattered, crippled, or dead, Ulfric said. We found debris fields, life pods, a warp scar where something very large translated under duress. And this, he tapped the waveform, coming from deeper in the vein. He nodded to the Magos overseeing the auspex array. Play him the raw signal, Ulfric said. The hololith flickered. Sound, harsh and thin, bled into the air. Static crackles, the faint groan of stressed metal. Beneath it, a rhythm. Hakon closed his eyes. He listened. The pattern under the static resolved itself in his mind into words. Not literal words, but associations burned in by memory. A day of fire. A wall. A battered officer in a torn greatcoat, shouting into a command vox while the world fell apart around her. If you ever hear this pattern, Elira Voss had said years ago in a quieter moment, tapping a sequence into the side of a dormant voxcaster, you'll know it's one of mine. Kharon code. Old regimental trick. Nobody outside the PDF ever bothered to learn it. Hakon opened his eyes. What does it say? Ulfric asked. It is a distress call, Hakon said. From Kharon, iteration 7, segment 2 of their emergency cipher. It means holding position under extreme duress. He frowned, but there's an additional modulation. A signature. He gestured. Repeat the last 10 seconds. Isolate channel 3. The Magos obeyed with a flurry of mechadendrite gestures. The sound thinned further, the static peeling away. A voice lurked under it, cracked. Stretched by transmission, wrapped in distortions, but a voice all the same. Stood the line once. We will stand again. This is Galatea's oath. Kharon Diaspora Vessel 317. Any loyal Imperials receiving, respond. We cannot break clear. Children aboard. Systems failing. Here stood the line. Here we. The message cut out in a scream of interference. Hakon's hands had tightened into fists. Galatea's oath, he repeated. A civilian transport, Ulfric said. Registry from a decade past. One of the Diaspora ships authorized to evacuate surplus population and certain key personnel from Kharon's gate after the siege. Hakon's gaze flicked to the red region on the hololith. The silent vein pulsed like an old scar. How deep are they? He asked. Far enough to be a problem, Ulfric said. The vein is a warp scar that tears at augers and hulls alike. The Mechanicus marks it as marginally traversable with extreme caution. The Navis Nobilite call it an insult to their profession and avoid it when they can. And us, Hakon said. We are the Iron Wolves, Ulfric said. We do not avoid the dark just because it howls at us. Skorvald entered the strategium then, as if summoned by those words. He took in the hollows with one sweep of his eyes and exhaled through his teeth. So, the wolf priest said, the ghosts of Kharon call, and the Jarl considers whether to answer. Ulfric shot him a look that was half rebuke, half weary humor. I consider the needs of the crusade, Ulfric said. The main fleet moves to break the heretic bastion at Kurnos Reach. We are tasked with clearing their picket forces, not chasing every distress call in cursed space. He looked back at Hakon. Say what you are thinking, Ulfric said. You grimace loudly enough. Hakon met his Jarl's gaze. I gave my oath, he said quietly, that Kharon would not fall while I drew breath. We held the wall. We drove off Vardek. That world still stands. Now I hear that oath echoed in the void, bound to a ship carrying its people. You know what I must ask? Ulfric's lips pulled back from his teeth in something not quite a smile. I do, he said. You want leave to take a strike force into the vein and pull them out? Yes, Hakon said. Or at least end their suffering. A transport full of civilians, crippled in warp-touch space, broadcasting its location on old Kharon codes. If we do not reach them, something else will. Skorvald folded his arms. Listen to yourself, the wolf priest said. You already carry more oaths than is wise. The chapter has its own wars. The crusade has its own priorities. You cannot haul every promise behind you like a chain. The chain is there whether I admit it or not, Hakon said. This is not every ship in distress. This is Galatea's oath. This is the line calling me back. He looked back at Ulfric. You asked me to stand where the enemy most wished I was not, Hakon said. I tell you now, the enemy will be in that vein, hunting survivors. That is where I should be. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then Ulfric barked out a laugh, short and sharp. You are a stubborn beast, Greymane, he said. Very well. I will not leash you when your instincts are this strong. Vargbjorn will alter course and skirt the outer edges of the vein. You will take a rapid strike force, 1 company's worth at most, and follow this signal inward if the Navigator can plot a viable path. Skorvald frowned. Ulfric. We cannot spare more, Ulfric said, ignoring him. I will not let one transport drag the entire great pack into a warp scar on the eve of battle. You will have enough to fight off raiders, not a fleet. You will have limited time before I must recall you to rejoin the crusade line. And if the vein proves too violent, you will turn back. This is an order. Hakon nodded once. I understand, he said. Do you? Skorvald murmured. Ulfric jabbed a finger toward the hololith. Prepare your brothers, the Jarl said. The vein will not be kind. The silent vein was poorly named. As Vargbjorn dropped toward its edge, the warp grew loud, not in sound but in sensation. Geller fields thrummed at the upper edge of their tolerances. Auspex screens crawled with phantom contacts. The navigators shuddered under the weight of shifting currents. In the forward launch bay, Hakon walked the lines of grey-armored Astartes readying for deployment. Drop pods, boarding craft, a handful of storm talons. This was not a full war host. It was a hunter's party, lean and sharp. Bjarki checked the teeth on his chain axe with reverent care. Torvald oversaw the rites of ignition on a Thunderhawk's engines. Other brothers muttered litanies, checked seals, exchanged quiet bets on how many times the vein would try to kill them before they reached their quarry. Skorvald met Hakon near the ramp of the lead gunship. You know I will accompany you, the wolf priest said. It was not a question. Yes, Hakon said. I had assumed you would insist on watching me risk my life needlessly. I have to be there to tell the saga properly, Skorvald replied. It loses flavor if I have to embellish from second-hand accounts. He sobered, eyeing Hakon. Jests aside, he said, this is dangerous ground, in more ways than one. The warp does not forget. Vardek's masters will remember the sting of their failure at Kharon. If they have any sense of poetry, they will choose to make their countermove where it echoes most. Then they can find us, Hakon said. Better we meet them than some fat pilgrim convoy. Skorvald grunted. Rune priest Halvar will ride with us, he said. The vein is loud enough without sending you into it without a storm tamer. Good, Hakon said. I would rather have a wolf who knows the wind at my back. From the overhead voxcasters came Ulfric's voice. Greymane, the Jarl said. We stand at the edge of the vein. The Navigator has plotted you a narrow path, stable enough for a small group, too unstable for the whole pack. Once you detach, your link to us will be thin. Do not get lost. We will return, Hakon said. See that you do, Ulfric replied. I will be in a foul mood if I have to explain to the Wolf Lord that I let one of my best hunters wander off into the dark chasing a ghost from a wall. There was a flicker of amusement in his tone, but under it, iron. By your leave, my Jarl, Hakon said. Go, Ulfric said. Find your ship, end its suffering one way or another. Translating into the vein was like diving into icy water. One moment the gunships rode the familiar turbulence of the warp under the Geller field's dull glow. The next, reality flexed and shuddered. Colors bled at the edges of sight. The lights dimmed, brightened, dimmed again, as if the ship itself was blinking. On the command throne of the lead gunship, Hakon felt the hull's unease as a faint vibration through his armor. "Status," he said. "Geller field holding," came the pilot's reply, his voice tight but steady. "Void shields within expected parameters. Navigation, approximate." Halvar Stormeye stood near the center of the troop bay, his runic staff planted on the deck. His eyes were unfocused, seeing things beyond the metal walls. "The currents curl around us," the rune priest murmured. "Something stirs deeper in, old, hungry. But it does not yet see us. The path the navigator plotted is a wound that has scabbed, not bled anew." Reassuring, Bjarki muttered over the squad vox. In a doom-laden sort of way, Hakon ignored the banter. His attention was on the beacon. It pulsed on his helm display as a faint icon. Jedi 317, Galatea's Oath, signal intermittent. Each time it flickered, the old Kharon code rode under the identification like a remembered tune. Here stood the line. "Here we range," Hakon asked. "Variable," the pilot said. "Space is longer here than it should be, but by the cogitator's best guess, we will reach the last known source in 30 minutes of our time." "Of ours," Skorvald murmured. "Not theirs. Time dilation. A familiar curse. For the ship broadcasting that signal, minutes might have passed, or years." "Hold to the path," Hakon said. "Whatever waits, we will face it as it is." Galatea's Oath arrived without fanfare. One moment the vein was a sea of nonsense. Drifting debris, phantom readings, half-formed echoes of things that might once have been ships. The next, the gunship's auspex shrieked as a shadow loomed out of the unreality. "Contact," the pilot snapped. "Dead ahead, 5,000 kilometers and closing. Configuration matches Imperial Transport Class. Keel code fragment go." "That's her." "Bring us in," Hakon said. The transport rolled into view on the forward pick displays as the veins mists thinned. She had once been a bulk hauler of some sort, boxy, functional, ugly. Now her hull was scored black where void fire had licked her. Sections of armor plating were peeled back like torn skin. Lifeboat racks gaped empty along her flanks. Vox masts hung broken. One of the primary engines flickered fitfully, vomiting matter and light in hesitant spurts. The ship drifted at a bad angle, one side lower than the other, as if ashamed of itself. "Any other contacts?" Hakon asked. "None solid," the pilot said. "Plenty of ghosts." The beacon pinged again. Here stood the line. "Here we Hallion." Then it cut off. "Too close to be coincidence," Skorvald murmured. "Bring us alongside," Hakon ordered. "Mag clamps. We will board." Galatea's Oath felt like a tomb. The boarding umbilical sealed with a dull boom. Rites of breach were intoned. Hakon led the way, stepping through the threshold onto the transport's deck plating. The air on the other side was stale, thin, and bore the faint tang of recycled fear. His helm autosenses adjusted. The corridor beyond was lit only by emergency strips, pulsing weak red. The walls were scabbed with hastily applied purity seals and hand-painted aquelarre. In places, someone had scrawled litanies directly onto the metal in chalk or blood. Skorvald's boots thudded behind him. "Smells like a place that has been waiting to die for a long time," the wolf priest said. Halvar raised his staff, eyes narrowing. "The warp is close here," the rune priest said. "Thin in places, but not ruptured. Not yet." "Life signs?" Hakon asked. "Faint," said Torvald, consulting a handheld auspex. "Scattered. Hard to separate from background interference. Could be 20 souls, could be 100. Could be shadows." "Then we treat this as if the ship is still occupied and worth saving," Hakon said. "We move in pairs. If you see something that should not be, shoot it. If it does not die, fall back and let Halvar look at it." Reassuring, Bjarki muttered again. They advanced. The first bodies they found were near a sealed pressure door. They were not fresh. Time and thin air had dried them, but preservation fields had done enough to keep them from falling to dust. Men and women in Kharon PDF uniforms, their flak armor painted with the faded colors Hakon remembered. Their lasguns were clutched tight in bony hands. Their faces were frozen somewhere between fear and determination. One lay slumped with his back against the door, a vox set still strapped to his harness. A cracked headset hung off one ear socket. Hakon knelt, examining the portable vox. The casing had been opened and scavenged, wires rerouted, power feed jury-rigged from a nearby lumen circuit. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. "This is where the beacon came from," he said. "They cannibalized the local voxnet to boost their call." Skorvold crouched beside him, picking up a small metal object from the deck. It was a regimental pin, 217th in Kharon, Voss's old regiment, Skorvold said. Hakon took the pin and turned it over once in his gauntleted fingers. "Could be any of her officers," he said. "Diaspora ships were filled with soldiers." "Could be her," Skorvold said. Hakon said nothing. He slid the pin into a small compartment on his belt. "Doors still sealed," Torvald said, tapping the panel. "Security wards intact. No sign of forced entry. Which means whatever killed them was on this side," Skorvold said. Halvar closed his eyes, extending his senses along the corridor. "I feel no active warp presence," the rune priest said after a moment. "Only a stain, like smoke after a fire." "Then steel and starvation did the rest," Hakon said. He rose. "We move on. The bridge first, then the holds." They advanced deeper. The ship told them its story in fragments. Here, a barricade built from hab furniture and cargo crates, the scoring and shell impacts pockmarking the walls behind it. There, a makeshift chapel, dozens of candles melted into mutant stalagmites, a crude altar piled with whatever passes for relics among evacuees, a child's toy, a bent cogwheel, a torn regimental banner. In the mess halls, rows of tables had been pushed aside to make room for bedrolls. Hakon's auto-sensors picked up faint residues of cooked starches, boiled protein paste, the lingering traces of too many bodies crammed into too little space. How long were they adrift? Skorvold wondered aloud. "Long enough to run out of anything like comfort," Hakon said. "The further they went, the quieter it became. Not in sound, Vagbjorn's gunship, clamped to the hull outside, still hummed faintly through the deck, but in the feel of the place. That faint, ragged howl in the metal grew weaker, replaced by the soft, thick sensation of a place that had already endured its worst. "Bridge is ahead," Torvald said, consulting the ship's schematic they'd ripped from the Mechanicus data vault. The bridge doors were half-sealed, one panel stuck halfway down. Hakon planted his hands on the metal and forced it up with a grunt. Servos whined. Something cracked. The door rose far enough for a power-armored warrior to duck through. The bridge was a graveyard. Officers lay where they had fallen, slumped over consoles, piled at the foot of the command throne, curled around each other in corners. Many wore rebreathers, some still clutched sidearms. In the center, the shipmaster's throne sat empty. "Some died fighting," Skorvold said, nudging a spent casing with his boot. "Some died hating. Some died choosing not to listen," Halvar said, nodding toward a half-fused Vox panel where the controls had been physically ripped apart, replaced with purity seals and sigils of warding. Hakon's gaze scanned the dead. "None of these are Voss," he said. "She would not be on a diasporic bridge. She would be where the line needed to hold." He turned toward a secondary console, its screen cracked but still flickering faintly. "Can you access internal systems?" he asked Torvald. The big space marine nodded and set to work. His fingers, thick but deft, danced over the runes. He muttered litanies to coax the machine spirit into cooperation. "Life support. Cycling at minimum," Torvald said. "Power routed to a handful of sections. Medicae, lower holds, a chapel. Everything else is dark." "Life signs?" Hakon repeated. Torvald shook his head. "The Auspex is worse here than it was on the gunship. I can't separate residual energies from actual bioreadings. There might be survivors. There might be none." "Then we search the places where the living cling longest," Skorvold said. "Medicae, chapel, wherever they thought the Emperor might hear them." Hakon nodded once. "Take second and third squads and sweep the Medicae decks," he said. "Torvald, with them. Halvar, you're with me. We go to the chapel and the lower holds." Bjarki grinned. "Always wanted to see what faith looks like when you squeeze it long enough." Skorvold shot him a look. "Try not to blaspheme too loudly," the wolf priest said. "The warp is listening." The main chapel of Galatea's oath was a poor, desperate thing compared to the shrine aboard Vagbjorn. It had been improvisation even before the crisis. A refitted cargo bay, one wall hung with a mass-produced aquila plate, a few pews bolted down for stability. Now it was something else. The walls were thick with parchment. Actual parchment, made from actual skin. Some sheets were neat and careful, bearing full litanies written by steady hands. Others were jagged and frantic, single phrases scratched over and over until the surface tore. "Here stood the line." Hakon's heart stuttered again. The words were everywhere. On the walls, on the floor, on the ceiling, carved into the plasteel of the lectern, scratched into the armrests of the pews. Halvar inhaled slowly. "They took your words and made them a prayer," the rune priest said. At the far end of the chamber, before the aquila, a crude altar had been built from ammo crates and shattered hull plates. On it, surrounded by gutted candles, lay a small, battered object. A regimental cap, 2/17th Kharon PDF. The fabric was scorched, the brim cracked. Hakon approached it as if in a dream. His gauntlet hovered an inch above the cap, as if afraid to touch it. Behind him he heard Skorvald's voice in memory, on another ship, in another time. "Dangerous, binding yourself to mortals." There were no bodies in the chapel. That, more than anything, unnerved him. "They came here," he said, "made a shrine, made a vow, then went somewhere else to die." Halvar closed his eyes again, raising his staff. "The warp is thinner here," the rune priest murmured. Their faith pressed back the worst of it, but not forever. Something gnawed at the edges of this place, looking for purchase. He turned his head as if listening to a voice only he could hear. "Here is another anchor," he said. "Below. In the holds." Hakon finally touched the cap. He felt nothing but worn fabric and dried sweat, but he imagined Elira's head under it, once. Standing on a wall, shouting orders. "Let's go," he said. The lower holds were full of ghosts. Not literal specters, though in the vein that was never impossible, but the traces of a vanished population. Hakon and Halvar moved through vast spaces where people had once slept in rows, now empty. They passed makeshift play areas where children had scrawled chalk drawings of ships and warriors on the walls. A crude representation of a space marine, all broad shoulders and tiny head, stared back at him with lopsided eyes. They found more bodies here, few, scattered, each one a story cut off mid-sentence. In one corner they found a family huddled together, arms wrapped around each other, eyes closed. No violence, no wounds, just the extremity of thin air and failing systems claiming them gently once the terror had passed. Halvar blessed them under his breath. "Their fear screamed in the warp," he said. "But when they died, it was not in frenzy." "That matters, does it?" Hakon asked. "Yes," Halvar said. "To them." At the far end of the lowest hold, near the outer hull, they found another sealed door. This one bore a different set of sigils. Not just the usual hazard warnings and technical scripts, but hand-painted runes in Kharon's crude battlefield dialect. "Line breach room." "That is not regulation," Halvar muttered. Hakon planted his hand on the release. It did not move. "Power?" he asked. "Nominal," came Torvald's voice over Vox. "I'm seeing a feedback loop from your location. The door's been locked from the inside and tied into a dedicated circuit. I can cut it, but I don't know what the failsafes will do." "Can you hear anything beyond?" Skorvald asked. Halvar pressed his palm to the door. His eyes rolled white for a moment. "There is something," the rune priest said slowly. "Not demonic. Not exactly. A weight of emotion. A memory knotted so tightly it has become a pattern." "A prayer," Skorvald said. Hakon took a step back, looking at the door as if it were a wall again, under fire. "Cut it," he said to Torvald. There was a crackle on the Vox. Cutting. The lights flickered. The hum of power through the door sputtered. There was a stuttering whine, like a machine complaining of being woken from a long sleep. Then, with a groan, the door slid open a fraction. Cold air breathed out, tinged with stale incense. Hakon forced the door the rest of the way and stepped inside. The room beyond was small, bare metal walls. No viewports, no obvious function in the original ship design. Someone had given it a new purpose. On one wall, a crude diagram of the Hive Galatea breach had been painstakingly drawn in paint and charcoal, the rubble slope, the broken parapet, the lines of defenders. Small marks indicated positions. K for Cora Flint, V for Ven. A larger rune for Hakon himself, stylized like a wolf's head. Opposite it, a similar diagram, but this time of Galatea's oath herself. Little rectangles for compartments, lines for corridors, circles for reinforcement points. At the center of the room, sitting cross-legged before a makeshift shrine, was a skeleton. It wore a PDF officer's coat over void suit underlayers. The coat was scorched and patched, but Hakon recognized the cut. A power sword hilt protruded from a scabbard at its side, the blade's rest indicator long dead. The skull tilted slightly toward the shrine. On the shrine, surrounded by candles burned down to puddles of wax, was a single data slate. Hakon did not move for a long time. Skorvald and Halvar stood in the doorway, silent. "It could be anyone," Skorvald said softly. "Yes," Hakon said. "But it isn't," Skorvald said. "No," Hakon agreed. He stepped forward, each bootful heavy. As he reached the corpse, something crackled near its throat. A small, delicate device, no bigger than a thumb joint, hung on a chain across the frayed collar. A personal vox bead wired into a micro-recorder. As Hakon's shadow fell over it, the device chirped weakly. A voice hissed into life, warped by time and bad conditions, but clear in cadence. "If anyone hears this who remembers Galatea's north wall," said Elira Voss, "you have my sympathies and my regard. You have also spent too long in the Emperor's service." The recording crackled. "We held," she went on. "We rebuilt as best we could. They called for volunteers for the diaspora ships. I went. My regiment had bled enough. I figured I'd help shepherd some of the ones who hadn't yet." A cough. A dry laugh. "Turns out the void is no kinder than walls," she said. "We ran. They followed. We hid. They dug. You know how it goes." Hakon reached toward the data slate on the shrine, but did not touch it yet. "Greymane," the voice said, and his fingers stopped. "If you're hearing this, either you've come chasing my beacon like a stubborn bastard, or someone else found it and never told you. I'm going to assume it's the former. You struck me as the kind who keeps his own chains polished." Skorvald let out a slow breath. "You became a part of their creed," he murmured. "I don't know if we get out of this," Elira's recorded voice went on. "The warp here is bad, worse than on Kharon's worst days. I can't keep the people under control much longer. They're scared. They remember what happened when men started listening to the whispers back home. I've had to put down 3 would-be prophets already." Another crackling pause. "So we did what we did before," she said. "We made a line. This ship is our wall. We hold it as long as we can. We send the beacon. We hope." Static swelled, then faded. "If you come," Elira said quietly, "and if you find this, know that I don't expect you to save us. We were dead the moment we entered this vein. But I know you, Hakon. You'll try anyway. That's who you are. That's why I asked for your oath." A faint, weary chuckle. "Don't let it break you," she said. "You saved the ones on Kharon. You kept the wall. That was enough. If we die here, then we die knowing the Emperor heard us once, when it mattered." The Vox stuttered. "Oh," she added, almost as an afterthought. "If by some miracle we get out, I'll send you a cask of whatever passes for decent drink on the other side of this mess. Assuming we're not both too busy chasing other lost causes by then." A final hiss, like a long exhale. "For what it's worth," Elira Voss said, "you kept your word. That's more than most can say." The recording clicked off. Silence settled. Hakon reached down and picked up the data slate. It flickered to life at his touch, showing a log of shipboard events, rationing rosters, discipline records, casualty lists. The last few entries were written in a familiar, sharp-edged script. "Seal lower hold. Too dangerous below. Something scratching on the hull. Halved rations again. Tempers rising. People praying more. Some praying wrong. Set up breach room. Turned oath into structure. They need something to cling to. So do I. Astropath dead. Burned out sending that last flare. I hope someone saw it." His thumb tightened on the slate. The final entry was shorter. "If he comes, he'll try to take the weight. Don't let him. This one is ours." He closed the slate and set it back on the shrine. Then he knelt. He did not pray. He did not know how to pray for a woman who might already be dead, or who might be hanging on by fingernails in some other corner of this damned ship. Instead, he bowed his head to her bones. "You held," he said quietly. Halvar shifted behind him. "Hakon," the rune priest said. "There is something else. Beneath us." "What?" Hakon asked without rising. "A fold," Halvar said. "A knot in reality. Small, but growing. Like a blister in the Gela field that never burst. It is anchored to this ship, tied to a pattern. The same pattern they used in their beacon. The same words on these walls." "Here stood the line," Skorvald said. "Yes," Halvar said. "The warp hears it differently. It sees a place where souls stood and did not break. It presses against it, trying to find a way in. This ship has been a wall as much as any piece of plasteel. If we do nothing, the knot will tear. The vein will have a new mouth, and something will come through into real space wherever this ship drifts." Hakon rose. "Show me," he said. The knot lay 3 decks down, near the damaged engine cluster. It was not visible at first glance. The corridor was just another stretch of steel, lit by strips of dying lumen, cables running along the ceiling. But as Halvar raised his staff, the air ahead of them rippled. At the far end of the corridor, reality had gone thin. The bulkhead there was wrong. Lines that should have been straight bent slightly at the edges. The seams where plates met did not quite line up from one heartbeat to the next. Light seemed to slow as it passed the section, stretching into lazy smears. Hakon felt pressure against his breastbone, as if someone were pushing 2 fingers gently but insistently there. "Warp breach in utero," Halvar said. He sounded almost clinical, but sweat beaded his forehead. "I can hold it, for a while. In its current state, it is too small for anything of significance to push through. But the ship is a lens. Every frightened prayer, every repetition of that line, has fed it. 1,000 tiny offerings of desperation. They made a stand, and the warp became obsessed with proving it could break it." Skorvald snorted. "The enemy hates a story where humans don't break," he said. "It would prefer they all ended the same way, with screaming and teeth." "Can we seal it?" Hakon asked. Halvar hesitated. "Yes," he said, "but not cleanly. The easiest way is to destroy the lens." "The ship," Skorvald translated. "We blow Galatea's oath." Hakon's jaw tightened. "How long?" he asked. "Until it tears on its own." "In this place," Halvar said. "Hours. Days. Years. Time is as frayed as everything else. But if we leave it, it will happen. Sooner or later, some passing warp beast will sniff at it, worry it, make it worse. Or the ship will drift close enough to some colony or beacon that the pressure will spike. And then we will have another Kharon's gate, but without a wall to hold it." Hakon stared down the corridor. He could almost see it then, not with eyes but with memory. 1,000 ordinary people, pressed into a ship they did not understand, looking out at a void that wanted to eat them. They had done the only thing they knew how. Turned their fear into ritual, their trauma into a pattern. They had written, "Here stood the line," on every surface that would hold ink. Carved it into air by the way they clenched their teeth and refused to scream. In doing so, they had created a place where humanity had mattered. And the warp, petty and vast, had resented that. "Elira wanted you to know this was their burden," Skorvald said quietly. "She did not want you to break yourself trying to carry it for them." "Too late," Hakon said. "I have been carrying it since the day I swore." He turned to Halvar. "If we destroy the ship," he said, "does it end here?" "It ends or moves," Halvar said. "The knot will lose its anchor. The energies will disperse or coalesce elsewhere, but they will no longer have this focal point, this mixture of faith and fear and stubbornness. It is a mercy, I think, for them and for the galaxy." "And the survivors?" Hakon asked. "If there are any," Skorvald tapped his Vox rune. "Torvald," he said. "Report. Medicae decks are empty," came Torvald's voice. "No living souls. Many dead. Some preserved better than they should be, for this environment. The sororitas had a presence. They did what they could." "Any other signals?" Skorvald asked. "None," Torvald said. "If anyone remained alive when we boarded, they have moved beyond our reach in the time it took you to play with doors." Halvar nodded slowly. She died here, he said. Years ago, by our measure. The time differential in the vein means little. Her bones have more dust on them than this mission has hours behind it. Hackon looked back toward the room where Elira sat forever kneeling before her shrine. He thought of her voice on the recording. If we die here, then we die knowing the Emperor heard us once, when it mattered. He nodded. Then we do what must be done, he said. Planting the charges was simple work, technically. The Iron Wolves were good at it. They had shattered fortresses, crippled engines the size of cities, collapsed caverns that ran for kilometers. One more ship was almost routine. It did not feel routine. As they moved through Galatea's oath, setting primed melter charges against load-bearing supports and plasma conduits, Hackon felt the weight of each one. In the chapel, Skorvald paused before the altar of Here Stood the Line. He did not remove the parchment from the walls. He did not disturb the cap. He simply placed one gauntleted hand on the edge of the makeshift altar and bowed his head. Your stand is over, he said. You held as long as you could. Let the sagas carry the rest. Halvar stood in the corridor of the warp knot, his staff grounded, sweat running down his temples. As they finished setting the last charge there, he exhaled with relief, as if a pain in his bones had eased. The vein feels you, he said to Hackon. It watches what you do with this burden. Let it watch, Hackon said. Let it learn that some oaths are kept not by clinging but by letting go. At last, they returned to the boarding point. Hackon was the last to step back through the umbilical. He paused at the threshold and turned one final time, looking back down the dim corridor into the bowels of the dying ship. For what it is worth, he said. You are seen. Then he crossed back into the gunship and sealed the hatch. They withdrew to a safer distance before detonating the charges. On the forward pict screen, Galatea's oath drifted in the vein like a wounded animal. On your word, Greymane, Skorvald said. Hackon's finger hovered over the rune. He thought of Kharon's gate, of the breach, of Elira's dry laugh and Ven's shaking hands, and Sergeant Flint dragging wounded from a crater. He thought of the children's chalk drawings on the hold walls. This is not how I imagined keeping my promise, he said. It is exactly how it was always going to be, Skorvald replied gently. Wall or ship or world, it always ends in us choosing how something falls, not whether it does. Hackon pressed the rune. Tiny flares winked along the transport's hull as the melter charges bit. Internal detonations rippled through the structure. For a few heartbeats, the ship seemed to swell, as if taking a last breath. Then it came apart. A bloom of light tore through the vane's mists, followed by a wash of particulate matter and energy. The warp shivered. The knot at its heart screamed a sound that only Halvar and the Geller field truly heard, then tore free. Energy rippled outward and dissipated. Where Galatea's oath had drifted, only a cloud of wreckage remained, spinning slowly under forces too subtle to name. Hackon watched until the last flickers died. Signal? He asked. The beacon is gone, Torvald said. So is the knot's primary signature. The vein's turbulence is no worse than before. Which is bad enough, Bjarki muttered. Halvar slumped slightly, as if a weight had gone out of him. It's quieter, the rune priest said. In a way that matters. Skorvald looked at Hackon. You did not save them, the wolf priest said. You could not. You chose instead to stop their suffering from birthing something worse. That is not the tale you wanted, but it is the one you had. I know, Hackon said. He turned away from the view and moved to the gunship's small side viewport. Out there, beyond the vein, the unmarked dark stretched. Kharon, he said. I swore that the wall would not fall while I drew breath. It did not. Now, this. You did not betray that oath, Skorvald said. You extended it. You made sure their last stand did not become a weapon for the enemy. You honored their line by choosing how it ended. Hackon let that sit for a moment. It does not feel like victory, he said. It isn't, Skorvald said. But it is enough. Sometimes enough is the best we are allowed. Hackon thought of the data slate's final line. This one is ours. No, he said at last. It was theirs. We only wrote the ending. Halvar straightened, rolling his shoulders. The currents shift, the rune priest said. The path back to Vargbjorn opens. If we delay, it may close. Hackon nodded. "Take us home," he said. The return translation out of the vein felt like waking from a drowned sleep. The gunship shuddered once as it crossed the edge, then stabilized. Lights brightened to normal. The sense of pressure eased. Vagbjorn loomed ahead on the auspex, a familiar fang in the void. "Vox contact," the pilot said. "Ulfric is on the line." The Jarl's voice filled the cabin. "Greymane," Ulfric said. "Report. My navigators are complaining, my wolf priests are restless, and the Crusade's Vox officers have sent me 2 inquiries and 1 thinly veiled threat about your whereabouts." Hakon glanced at Skorvald, who shrugged. "We found Galatea's oath," Hakon said. "We did not find her alive. We found instead the seed of something worse. We destroyed it. I will brief you fully on return." "Any survivors?" Ulfric asked. "No," Hakon said. There was a pause. Ulfric exhaled. "Then you did what could be done," the Jarl said, "and probably more than anyone had a right to expect. Your path back will intersect with our redeployment vector. We make for Kurnos Reach. The war does not wait." "No," Hakon said. "It does not." When they docked, and the tales were told in full in the Strategium, there was some debate over whether Hakon had risked too much, gone too deep, carried too heavy a weight for a single ship's worth of dead. Some among the Iron Wolves shook their heads and said nothing. Others nodded, understanding too well the compulsion to chase echoes. Skorvald, for his part, carved new names into bone. Not those of Galatea's Oath's crew, they would never fit. But the ship's name, and 1 more line beneath it. Here stood the line again. Later, alone in the chapel, Hakon stood before Ragnar Halfword's statue. "I have not yet spread myself across 3 worlds, he said quietly. "But I begin to understand how you got there." The stone warrior, as always, said nothing. Hakon moved down the row. Someone, Skorvald no doubt, had placed a small, rough carving on an empty plinth, a simple representation of a wall with a breach in it. No name yet, only a single line in Gothic and Fenrisian below. "The weight of oaths." Hakon snorted softly. "That is melodramatic," he said. But he did not move it. As Vagbjorn changed course, engines flaring, and translated again toward Kurnos Reach, Hakon stood at a viewing port and watched the stars distort. Somewhere, in the tangled skein of the warp, a howling note faded a little. Not silenced, never silenced, but changed. He had not broken his oath to Kharon. He had bent it, reforged it, hammered it into something that might yet hold under greater strain. There would be other calls, other lines. And one day, as Skorvald had predicted, the chains of his promises would pull him to a place where even an Iron Wolf could not stand without breaking. But that would be another story. For now, the howl in the void had been answered, and the galaxy burned on.